What's up, everyone? I am Enna, and here with me are my teammates Mark, Hannah, Jean, Joman, and Sok. And today we will be discussing something interesting. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the mind-blowing ride. So this video will tackle the scientific status of unconscious processes. But first off, what is the unconscious process? The unconscious process in psychoanalytic theory is the psychical process that takes place in the unconscious. It functions beyond an individual's awareness and plays a significant part in controlling thoughts and feelings and triggering mental illness. So, in tackling the unconscious process, first let us look at the concept of memory. So, the memory involves three memory stores. So, first we have the initial sensory registration, where memory lasts very briefly. So, for example, remembering the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee coming from a store. The next one, we have the short-term memory, which briefly stores information currently being used. So, for example, remembering what you had for lunch yesterday or the details of the book that you have read a few days ago. And lastly, we have the long-term memory, which relatively stores information at a longer duration. So now let us dive into the evidence for unconscious cognitive processes. So given the changes that took place, human thought and memory involve at least two systems: the implicit memory or the unconscious and the explicit memory or the conscious. So what is the difference between implicit and explicit memory? So implicit memory refers to knowledge that we are not conscious of recalling, but they influence our behavior or thought without being aware of it. On the other hand, explicit memory is a declarative memory because we can describe their contents verbally. Or in other words, these are the memories that we remember or recall consciously. So, do you notice how you know how to brush your teeth even without remembering every detail of each step? Well, that is your implicit memory working right there. How about when you answer an exam? So, unlike brushing your teeth, you are consciously remembering information to answer the questions, right? Well, that, our friends, is your explicit memory. Now, we will be moving on to the procedural memory. So, what is procedural memory? So, do you sometimes experience stopping in the middle of doing something and thinking, how in the world are you able to do what you are doing? Well, that, our friends, is the beauty of your procedural memory. So, procedural memory is a kind of implicit memory. So, it stores the how-to information, such as how to do things, skills, and habits. So, now let me pass the mic to my partner, Mark, to discuss with you associative memory.
Hello everyone, I'm Mark. So now another type of implicit memory is the one we call the associative memory. Associative memory is the formation of associations that guide our mental processes and behavior outside of our consciousness. So what does it mean? To make it simple, it is when we create a connection between two pieces of information in our brain that are not necessarily related to each other. So it can be thought of as something that triggers our memory for another thought. So an example of this occurring is when you're introduced to someone, like me, for example, I may say, "Hi, my name is Mark," and you associate that name with my face, and that becomes an associated connection between who I am as a person and my name. So now that we have finished the first part of our report, let me pass the mic to my group member to discuss the next topic.
Thanks, Anna and Mark. Now let's talk about the unconscious, starting with the evidence for unconscious processing. The existence of unconscious cognitive processes was determined and eventually normalized in psychology. Evidence supports the notion that affective and motivational processes can be unconscious and are important to human mental life. Starting with neurological data, research presented evidence for the existence of unconscious affect emotions that are experienced without consciousness. For example, an individual who suffered brain damage, even due to memory loss, can still feel in some big way if something bad had happened to their loved ones. Another topic is conditioning and unconscious processes. Studies suggest that people can learn to associate situations or people with pleasant or unpleasant feelings without awareness. For example, seeing someone on the road would create an unconscious response in an individual, which may encourage you to either approach or avoid that person. Lastly, unconscious prejudice is also one of the biases which can affect our behavior and attitudes even if we're not aware of them. For example, people may unconsciously associate negative traits with certain racial or gender groups even if they're consciously rejecting such stereotypes.
For my part, the unconscious effect and defensive processes. It discusses the relationship of unconscious effect and psychological defense mechanisms. Studies have shown that individuals who are less defensive tend to have self-reports that relate with how others describe them, while defensive individuals do not see themselves as others do. Repression is also an example of unconscious defense mechanism. Next is the unconscious sexual arousal. A study provided evidence for the classic psychoanalytic theory of homophobia as a defense against threatening homosexual feelings. For example, a study showed men who identified themselves as homophobes showed indications of arousal while having have homosexual intercourse. Next is the narcissism and self-enhancement. It explained that most people tend to view themselves as above average on most positive characteristics, such as intelligence. Next is defense against unpleasant emotions and its physiological correlates. The study of Dozier and Kobach showed the negative impacts of denying or avoiding unpleasant emotions. Other studies have shown that an individual can have positive effects when writing or discussing painful experiences. There are many implications for the psychoanalytic theory on the unconscious mind, like how it affects our daily lives, and another thing is that it gives proper understanding of traumatic memories. With this, free association can be useful in therapeutic techniques as it bypasses conscious defensive processes. In conclusion, our unconscious mind can affect certain processes such as our arousal, behavior, emotions, health, memory, and biases. Now for the next part, Hannah and Sok.
Now, let us move on to the interesting concept of unconscious motivations. Unconscious motivation refers to hidden and unknown desires that are the real reasons for the things that people do. When conscious motives are activated, they guide behaviors and can override unconscious motives. When they are not, which happens most of the time, unconscious motives guide behavior. Barthes has documented the existence of unconscious motivational processes experimentally. He argues that automatic unconscious motives of people through repeated experiences in a given situation are often better guides to action than the conscious. On the other hand, the concept of transference has documented unconscious motivational processes. We need a better theory of the conditions that activate unconscious motives and that lead them to influence consciousness and behavior. Studies and researches on unconscious motives suggest the importance of disentangling unconscious motives from primitive motives. These findings from the experiments challenge the concept of primitive need as the primary repository of all motivations. Rather than the level of consciousness, Freud describes psychic structures in terms of functions. To spread motives through all the psychic structures, the structural model itself should be recalibrated. These are some of the examples and applications of unconscious motives which normally happens to people. The slip of the tongue, which is also called as Freudian slip or paraxis. It is a verbal or memory mistake which is usually linked to the unconscious mind. These slips apparently reveal private thoughts and feelings that individuals hold. I know you have already experienced this while talking to someone who should not hear what you just said. How does it feel? It is your unconscious motivation doing the job for you. Purposive accidents. These are accidents which the body is hurt in seemingly fortuitous accidents, but closer examination reveals they are unconscious wishes of the victim.
So as we now learned about the unconscious processes, let us now talk about the fate of the unconscious. So the studies described earlier leads to a conclusion that Freud was right as that much of the human's mental life, which includes the thought, feeling, and emotion, are unconscious. However, is he really right about this? Well, actually, this hypothesis had led to heated debates for centuries. So unconscious processes have always been studied by researchers, claiming that it functions as the sensation and perception to memory, decision-making, emotion, and motivation. Philosophers also speculated that there are something inside the soul that is greater than us, wherein Freud converted this into a set of secular propositions about the mind, which made sense as he writes about the unconscious. However, the link between the unconscious to the primitive and instinctual was not altogether accurate, which is why he rectified this as he realized that many ego and superego processes are unconscious. So the empirical research that was reviewed through the discussion earlier may be useful in testing the psychoanalytic theory or for refining it. As we have gone through the discussion, the criticisms of psychoanalysis, wherein they said that unconscious processes is without empirical foundation, can be now put at rest. So that's it for now. I hope you learn a thing or two through our video. Bye!